Hello class and welcome to your next lesson on commercial manufacture. In this lesson we're going to look at how metals are manufactured in industry. So we're going to look at three commercial processes for manufacturing metal. These are die casting, sand casting and drop forging. So the drop forging and the die casting can be used in the mass manufacture of products, and these are products made on computer-aided production lines. However, sand casting is not suitable for mass manufacture and is used for one-off production. You need to be able to describe these methods and their identifying features for National 5, and we'll go through these, the actual processes and the features in the next few slides. And you could be asked about this in your exam to identify a manufacturing method, for example, and describe how you know that, which is why we have set the practice questions at the end. So on this slide, I've given you a product to associate with each of the manufacturing methods, and you might find this useful because you can compare any product you're asked to identify and see which of these it most closely matches. So for die casting, you can think of the inside of car wheels. For sand casting, think of big heavy boat anchors. And for drop forging, you can think of the heads of golf clubs. These are the processes that are used to manufacture these products. The first commercial metal process that we will look at is die casting. And this can be thought of as just like the injection moulding for plastics, but instead of injecting plastic into the mould, it's molten metal, and you can see that in the diagram down here. So looking at this image, the metal is forced into the mould, and in this case the mould's called a die. The molten metal goes into the die under high pressure. And when it cools down, it solidifies, and the two parts of the mould can then be separated. These are pushed out by ejector pins, which force them out of the die, and they can be used over and over again to make high volumes of the same individual product. And with that, you'll get a really accurate product that's consistent in its form. So how can we tell if a product has been die cast? So we can look at some of the identifying features associated with it. So typically a solid metal product, and it could have a pattern on the surface or writing on the surface. You get a really good surface finish with this type of process. You get a good strength to weight ratio. You can see split lines sometimes in the end product where the two parts of the die have come apart, and injection marks where the molten metal has been put in, or the ejector pin marks where the product's been pushed out of the mould, out of the die. So remember, die casting can be used as part of a mass manufacture production line, and it's used where there's a high demand for the product, producing this very accurate and consistent finish. Next, looking at sand casting. This is used for one-off products or products where there's a low demand, and it's often used for large, heavy, solid metal products like the anchor that we mentioned. The process works by putting casting sand into the bottom of a box, and in the diagram you can see this is called, this is called the drag. So this is filled with casting sand. There's then a wooden pattern made of the object to be cast in the metal. So sticking with the example of the anchor, there would be a full-size wooden version of the anchor created, and this wooden anchor would be called the pattern. The pattern's then placed in the drag in the box filled with the sand and pressed down, and the same thing happens on the top of the mould. The wooden pattern's then removed, and this leaves the shape that you're going to cast in the metal. So molten metal is then poured down into the cast, and once it's filled, it's left to cool, and then it's broken out using hacksaws. So this is why this can only be used for one-off manufacturing, because the cast is taken apart at the end to get the product out. When this is done, sometimes the hacksaws can leave marks on the surface of the final product, and these are called fettle marks and are one of the identifying features. Other ways to identify if sand casting has been used, typically used for solid heavy products, generally have a very rough or a rough surface finish because of the texture of the sand, and they would have sloping sides. The product would have sloping sides, and this is so it can be easily taken out of the mould. So our next and final metal process is drop forging, and this is used to manufacture products that need to be stronger than those created through the casting processes. So these metal products are formed by compressing metal, and the process of this compression causes the gaps in the metal to close and the molecular structure, if you like, of the metal to change, and this is what causes it to be stronger. This adds strength to the product. So there's a lot of force you can imagine that is needed in this process to cause this molecular change in the structure. So looking at the wee diagram, right hand side, this is the pressure coming down, the force coming down. It's very similar to compression moulding that we looked at for the plastics. The piece of metal to be forged, and it's shown in red in this diagram, is placed into the die. And remember here the mould is called the die when we're working with metal. And the die closes, and this compresses the workpiece between the top and the bottom part. A ram is then used to apply pressure, and this causes the metal to form into the desired shape and fill the cavity of the die. Because there is a lot of pressure applied, you can get some material splitting out the sides, and you can see it here. This is called flashing, and it's basically where excess material is flooded out of the die partially. This can be a way of actually identifying that a product has been drop forged if you can see evidence of this flashing, or where the flashing has been removed. Other identifying features include split lines, where the two parts of the die have been pulled apart to get the product out, a good surface finish on the final product, and again a draft angle, so sloping sides that will allow the product to be easily lifted out of the mould. So your task now is to use the knowledge from going through these few slides to identify how these 6 products have been manufactured, and there's a worksheet attached to your Show My Homework for this lesson that you need to complete. So we're asking you to state which method has been used, your die casting, sand casting or drop forging, and explain your thinking, your justification as to how you've identified that as the process for that particular product. Once you've done that, you've completed the worksheet, please send it to your teacher. You can email it or upload it on to Show My Homework, and your teacher will give you some feedback in that. So thank you for listening, and good luck with the task.